Hey, thanks for checking out the video. If you all like it, please like and subscribe, and hope you all enjoy it. Have a great rest of the day.
And adults, because there's something everyone can learn about 18th century medicine. At the end of this, you'll feel very glad you were in the 21st century and not in the 18th century. So let me ask you a question. What was the flag most feared in the American Revolution? Which flag? You got the British flag, you got the Patriot flags, you got the Gadsden flag, you got all these flags. Which one was the most feared in the American Revolution?
British.
You want to guess again? What color was it? We'll start off with colors. What color is the American flag?
Red.
And?
Blue.
And?
White.
It's none of those colors. What color is the British flag? Also red, white, and blue. It wasn't those colors. What color was it?
Really don't know.
That was the most feared flag in the American Revolution. Do you know why it's a yellow flag? Quarantine. More soldiers died of infectious disease in the American Revolution than of injuries sustained in a battlefield. They died in camps by the droves. There were some really bad diseases. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But first, let's talk about women in the 18th century. What was the most common cause of death in relatively young women once they went through childhood? What was the most common cause of death for women? It's something that men cannot do, by the way. Childbirth, exactly. Very dangerous. They didn't have OBGYN. They didn't have anesthesia. They had theories that were 2,000 years old, and that's what they were using. It was not a good time to be sick in the 18th century. What was the second most common injury women would sustain and die from in the 18th century? And again, it's a task that usually falls to women. Men can do it, but women usually did it in the 18th century.
Cooking fires?
Cooking fires. Because how long were the dresses?
Yeah.
Yeah. And where were they cooking?
Yeah.
In a hearth. And the fires in the hearth, the dresses catch on fire, and they die from being burned. Not so much from the burn, but from what? Same reason why people die of burns today. It's not so much the burn, it's the infection. It's the infection afterwards. So in the 18th century, they didn't know about viruses, they didn't know about bacteria, they didn't know about modern science. They were using theories of medicine that were over 2,000 years at the time. So how would you like to be an 18th century physician? I'm going to teach you how to be an 18th century doctor. Does that sound good?
Yep.
Okay. Let's start off with the basics. In the human body, there are 4 humors, or fluids. Name those fluids. Name 4 fluids from the human body. This is everybody. Blood. Blood's the easy one. You got blood, right? What was that? Snot. Well, it kind of. If you have a cough and you're bringing stuff up, we call that phlegm. So phlegm. And then I heard somebody say bile. There are 2 different types of bile.
Black and green.
Black and yellow.
Yeah.
Yellow bile. Have you ever seen black or yellow bile? Yes, you have. You just didn't know what you're looking at. Have you ever thrown up?
Did yesterday.
What was the color? Green? Well, I'll tell you why it was green in a minute. But it also can be, you ever had really bad diarrhea? Did you have that too yesterday?
Oh my word.
If you have really bad diarrhea, what color is it in the toilet bowl?
Don't know.
Yellow, right? Yellow. So that's yellow bile. Little anatomy, little physiology. You got your stomach. That's esophagus, down into the stomach, goes into the stomach, comes around the small intestine.
Then the big intestine.
Before it gets to that big intestine, right when it first starts being the small intestine, a bile duct comes out, which is coming from the liver, and there's a gallbladder attached to it, and people like me make their living off of removing things like that. Why do doctors take out a gallbladder? I mean, why did God put a gallbladder there? Or why did he put an appendix? Because you say, well, what do I need it for? He says, well, you really don't. Why would God put it there if you didn't need it? Because general surgeons have house and car payments like everybody else. That's why. So you have yellow bile that's secreted. This helps you digest fats, okay? Yellow bile. And then you've got black bile. When have you seen black bile?
I've never.
Yes, you have. When you have a bowel movement, okay? What color is the bowel movement, floating in the bowl or sinking in the bowl? What color?
No black.
Black, and usually it's brown. But that's where the black bile comes from. Now bile is a magical chemical. Because if I put a tube, a nasogastric tube, down inside your stomach and suck it out, I will see quite possibly nothing or a little bit of yellow bile. So have you ever been to a hospital where you see somebody with a tube down the nose and there's a container on the wall? And what color is that stuff in the container on the wall? It's yellow, but if you leave it on the wall long enough, it turns green. And if you leave it long enough, it turns black or dark brown. So you've seen all this before, you just didn't know what you were looking at. Now, if you have really bad diarrhea, I mean really bad diarrhea, just like water comes shooting out, it's going through your intestines very, very quickly, and it doesn't have time to change color. If it's taken its sweet time from the time food enters your mouth until it makes its exit at your convenience, it's dark. So you've seen all this stuff before. So those are the four humors. Black bile, yellow bile, red bile? No, red blood. And what was the last one?
Green.
Phlegm. The green was just a transition. That wasn't one of the original four. So, according to the ancients, your body is in balance with different fluids, right? All you are in imbalance. Now, if you get ill, you're out of balance. So you've either got too much of one thing or not enough of another thing. So your job as a physician is to figure out, is the sickness coming from too much or too little of one or the other colors of fluids? See? Pretty simple. Now let me give you a hypothetical. You have a patient who comes in and they have a fever. You ever had a fever? Did you have a fever yesterday when you were throwing up? Okay. Well, if you have a fever, what colors might your cheeks be? You got a high fever.
Red.
Red. Right. So you have a patient coming in, and they've got red cheeks, and they've got a fever. In the 18th century, fevers were... Today, there is no such disease as fever. You can have different things cause the fever, but in the 18th century, they thought fevers were a disease in and of themselves. And different types of fevers were different types of diseases, which is not actually true today, but we know now what we didn't know since 1780s ago. So if you have a patient that comes in the 18th century and they have a flushed cheek, it's red, you take their pulse, oh, it's rapid, it's bouncing, you got a fever. Where's the imbalance? Do you have too much or too little of one thing or another?
Probably too much of something.
Too much of what? Your face is red.
Blood.
Which one of these is red?
Blood.
Blood! So you got too much blood, right?
You suck blood out.
Exactly! So you remove the blood. How are you going to do it? You can take a needle, put it in your arm, and suck that out? The problem is today, have you ever had blood drawn at a hospital or a doctor's office where they stick your finger or take arm out of you've had that?
Oh yeah.
In the 18th century, they didn't have hollow needles. So, there were no syringes. Well, actually, there were syringes. Your real big syringe. Because you see, in the 18th century, you got too much or too little. Now, we're just talking about blood right now. But if your digestive system needs to be, you got too much stuff still inside you, you take a real big syringe and you create an enema, basically, and you will get rid of those fluids. Or you give pills to purge everything or to make you vomit. Because again, it's taking away or adding to. So with blood, though, you got red flushed cheeks, you got too much blood, you're going to take it out. How are you going to take it out since you don't have a syringe and a needle?
Probably a knife.
Exactly! Exactly! You're going to take out a fleam. Now, this is not an 18th century item. It looks like some of them, but this is really more 19th century. But see those sharp edges? They're sharp on both sides. And you would basically just take this instrument and oh, wait a minute, I can't find my vein. I know. Have you ever had blood drawn? What do they do to your arm before they draw the blood? A tourniquet. They put a tourniquet on. A rubber band gizmo, right? We don't have a rubber band gizmo. They didn't have rubber bands in the 18th century. But we do have just a little loop of cloth. You want to see how it's done? I won't cut you.
Today.
Okay, great. So there you turn around so everybody can see. So we're gonna put that arm out. We're gonna put this tourniquet up here, just loose, no big deal. Then we're gonna take a stick. We're gonna beat the fever into submission. No, I'm not gonna do that. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna turn it like this, okay? And as that turns, it will tighten up and it will create a constriction there. Let me see that other hand. You just hold on to that end of the stick. So what you do is you tighten it up. You get you to pump your fist, all that stuff, and then you take the blade and a bleeding bowl. Somebody says, "Oh, isn't this cute? It's for shaving, right?" No. You put that bowl there, and then you take that knife, and then you make an incision here, and then you just let it bleed.
That sounds pretty bad.
Well, how long do you let it bleed for?
Hours?
I don't know. You're the doctor. See, doctors know how long to let it bleed for. And you know, in medicine, we don't worry about bleeding because bleeding always stops. So once you've bled enough, what you do is just pull that stick straight out. That releases the tension. You put a bandage on there, and now your face isn't as flushed. And I'm checking your pulse, and it's not nearly as bounding, and it's not. So you're cured. See how that works? Now the fact that I totally ignored where the fever was coming from is like beside the point in the 18th century. So let me tell you, name a person who's really famous from the 18th century. He's in your wallet sometimes. George Washington. Okay, so let's say George comes to you, and George says, I got a sore throat, and I got a fever. What color are George's cheeks? What's he got? And too much?
One.
Yeah, so you're going to remove some blood, right?
Yeah, I just got a tongue in my mouth.
Well, you could, but then it's hard to sew it back on the 18th century. It's hard to sew it on today, but that's beside the point. But anyway, so you take blood out of it. He's still got red cheeks and a fever. Whoa, what are you going to do? Well, what's he got too much of?
Too much blood.
Yeah, you didn't take away enough. So you're going to take away more. And you do that, and you say, how you feeling? And he says, well, I feel a little tired, but I still feel, my throat's still sore, and he's still got a red fever. He still has high fever, red cheeks, high fever. What are you going to do?
Draw more blood.
Draw more blood. He still has red cheeks. Draw more blood. He still has red cheeks.
Draw more blood.
Draw more blood. He still has red cheeks.
Draw all the blood.
Draw blood. And then what happens?
So red.
He dies. And that's what happened to George. Poor George. They bled him out. Now, whether they actually bled him out, but they certainly hastened his demise for that. And that's how 18th century medicine was. Aren't you glad you didn't live in the 18th century? Now, there were some cool things that happened in the 18th century. Thank you very much. Thank you for volunteering. There were some cool things that happened in the 18th century. Because at the end of the 18th century, in 1798, in England, there was the invention of what? A Dr. Jenner invented this. Wait, let me back up a minute. What's the worst infectious disease you can think of? Cholera. Oh, chickpea. Oh, complexion as nice as a milkmaid. That's because they didn't have smallpox. Smallpox causes horrible scarring, not to mention the fact that 20 to 40% of the time you get smallpox, you're dead. But the good news is if you survive smallpox, you'll never get it again. But he found cowpox was getting into the skin around these nurses, these milkmaids in the wintertime would have cracked, dry skin, like everybody's skin is turning now. And they'd have little openings in the skin. And remember with the COVID business, they said, you can get COVID different ways. Don't get it into a cut. Or if you have broken skin, then you've got to wash your groceries in Clorox and all this stuff. So that's another way to get sick from cowpox. And they got cowpox. And when they got cowpox, it was a cousin of smallpox, and they never got smallpox. So he figured out this relationship, but we're talking 1798. By 1800, it was pretty much in vogue. People were reading these articles, and they were paying attention. And actually, Thomas Jefferson wrote a beautiful letter to Edward Jenner and explained to him that he is the savior of mankind, truly, because of his work. So that was 1805 or so. So by the 19th century, they had it pretty much figured out. But in the Revolutionary War, they didn't have that figured out. Do you know what George Washington did to his troops at Valley Forge? He had them inoculated against smallpox. But when was the vaccine? When did it start? Later. So what does this inoculation business mean? He gave his troops smallpox. And in doing so, he saved thousands of lives. Ooh, how does that work? Let's back up a little bit. Let's go back into the early 18th century. It's about 1718, and there is a woman who is married to the British ambassador to Turkey. Now, she almost died of smallpox. Her brother did die of smallpox. So smallpox was on her mind. Lady Mary Wharton. So she was tuned in to smallpox. And one of her physicians, she was also very wealthy and very influential in British society. One of her physicians said, I read this report. Now remember, reports were written down and it took a long time to disseminate ideas, but it came out of Turkey and Greece about a procedure where people actually gave patients smallpox and it saved their lives. And everybody goes, that's an old Greek wives' tale. It's an old Turkish wives' tale. That can't be, and they discarded that idea, but she didn't. And then when she went to Turkey, she noticed all the women had beautiful complexions. Beautiful complexions. They had been to Turkish baths. She could see skin. And there was just a lack of smallpox scarring. And they had smallpox in those countries, but what happened? How did that happen? Well, she found out that this old wives' tale was actually true. She got her surgeon, Dr. Charles Mattingly, who was with them, and they went and they learned about this, and he learned about it, and this is the procedure that was used. When children were of a certain age, if there was an outbreak of smallpox, they took the pus from a smallpox victim, scratched it onto the skin of a child, and the children were quarantined, and after they had smallpox, they'd never have it again, and only a very small number of people died, not the 20 to 40% that we get from regular smallpox. And that was the beginning of variolation. This information was passed on, and it ended up being published, and it ended up in Boston at the hands of a Dr. Boylston, who read this. Cotton Mather, remember Cotton Mather? The Salem witch trials and all that? Well, he saw the scientific article because he published a scientific article on curiosities in the United States, or in America. And when it was published, it was right next to another article. He read it. He shared this with his physicians. Well, Dr. Boylston had a son who was 5. He had a slave, Jack, and Jack's son, Jackie, also had never had smallpox. So being a science guy, he decided to try it out on his own son. All of them got smallpox, mild cases, they all recovered and lived to tell the tale. Now, in the meantime, in England, in 1721, when Mary came back, she had her son inoculated when she was in Turkey. The child was like 5 years old, and she had a baby while she was in Turkey. They said, the baby's too young, you gotta wait. So when she came back, there was an outbreak of smallpox in England, and she said, I want my kid inoculated, to the surgeon that understood how to do it and did the procedure for her daughter. He said, well, I'm kind of like, I got other people here that's going to pay attention to what I do. So I'm going to get a committee, because we all love committees, don't we? So they had a committee come of the leading scientific people. They watched, they observed, they watched this. The child got a mild case of smallpox, and it worked. They were astounded, but it worked. Can't argue with success. And then, did I tell you, Lady Mary's good friend was like the Princess of Wales, who was somebody who was, you know, if there was a TikTok influencer in the early 18th century, that was the Princess of Wales. The Princess of Wales demanded that her children be inoculated. Well, and all the science guys are going, yeah, work for the kid, but I'm not putting my neck on that block if it screws up, you know? I mean, it was just a sensible reaction. So what did they do? They didn't experiment. Of course. They went to Newgate Prison. They found a dozen people who were condemned to death for, like, stealing bread for their starving families and stuff like that. You know, definitely capital cases. And they said, tell you what, you undergo this procedure and you let us watch. If you survive, you're free to go. Well, they didn't have anything to lose. All of the, I think it was 9 or 10, all of them survived. And one guy had smallpox. He didn't think he had, but he had smallpox. He didn't react to the inoculation. So then, the Princess of Wales said, okay, I'm all in. All our children survived. And of course, being a TikTok influencer of the 18th century, everybody wanted in on that action. So in England, it took off. In the colonies, it was a little slower. But by the time Washington was around, he knew the importance of variolation. And he had his troops inoculated. I need somebody with a short sleeve shirt.
All right.
Okay, I'm gonna show you how to do a variolation.
All right.
All right, come on this way. All right, so here you go. We don't need to pump up the arm like we did with this. We're gonna get let's see. Now I'm going to use a scalpel. You know, originally all they used was a needle. The Turks just used a needle. They put a scratch in the skin, and it just turned a little red. But you know, any operation worth doing once is worth doing really well a couple of times later with bigger instruments. So of course they went to something bigger, like a scalpel. Okay, so now the nice thing about this, it is very sharp. You'll hardly even feel it. Let me get a clean one.
Don't use this like that.
I'm gonna use that one. So what they did is they would take this and then they would just make a little incision.
Oh, my arm.
That is pretty sharp.
Oh, try not to bleed on the floor, would you? Okay.
Oh my word.
So after that, then they get the smallpox. Now, I visited a patient this morning who had smallpox, and I took a little bit of that, you could peel off one of the pock marks, and there's a little pocket, a little pustule underneath it. You just collect it in a jar. And you take that and you just put that into that little incision we made. And somebody had a question about the little nuts here. This is the way it was described by Dr. Boylston when he published his treatise on this whole process. They put that over that incision with a little walnut, and then they took a bandage and they wrapped that up. Now you will get smallpox, so you have to be quarantined.
I gotta take the yellow flag.
You gotta go to the place where the yellow flag's flying to keep people away. Where does the word quarantine come from?
From that, probably.
No, where does the word quarantine come? Did anybody speak French? Français? Oui? Huh? Ooh. Does anyone speak French? Okay. Oh, you don't? I thought maybe you spoke French. Who's the lady in the back?
With the flower shirt.
Perfect. What is the word for 30 in French? 30. How about 40? 40. Oui. 40, quarantine. That's where quarantine comes from. It's 40 from the French, meaning 40. In medieval times, if you went to a walled city, they would make you camp outside of the walls, because this was a problem. They'd make you camp outside of the walls for how many days? 40 days. So they keep you camped outside 4 days before they let you inside, because they didn't want you bringing any foreign materials in, any infectious disease. So after that period of time, you would then be freed. It was a little less than 40 days, and when you lost your fever, assuming you survived, and the mortality rate dropped from 20 to 40% of the general population to 2%. So it's not 100%, but it's pretty darn good. Why? Why is that? Why is that this way? And you will find miraculously, because this was such a sharp knife, it's already sealed completely, and it will hardly even leave a mark.
Amazing. Nice.
Thank you for volunteering to be very. No, I'll leave it. The reason is now. Where do we know the word quarantine from recently? COVID, right? So COVID. Well, with COVID, it is a virus. What is smallpox?
Bacteria.
No, it's a virus. And it's transmitted by respiration, the same as COVID. Cough on you, goes in the air, you inhale it. Where did COVID want to live? Lungs. Where does smallpox want to live? Lungs. A lot of similarities. It's a different virus, but still, it's viral transmission of an infectious disease. Now, remember the different ways you can get COVID, which is why you had to scrub your stuff with Clorox and all that stuff, and go through all this Mickey Mouse stuff. Oh, don't rub your eye. You can put COVID in your eye. Well, there are different ways to get smallpox and COVID. If you get it in the skin, it takes about 3 days of festering before the virus gets to your lungs, which is where it wants to go the whole time. It's just waiting, just dying. Well, actually, you're dying for it to get to the lung. So the idea is your body's immune system, of course they didn't understand this in the 18th century, has 3 days to mount an immune response to a foreign body that it has never seen before. It has never seen before, which is why physicians are so worried about COVID, because it had never been seen before by anybody. And we had no idea, is this going to be another smallpox, or is this going to be, because, the numbers out of China were pretty savage. But that's 3 days of getting vaccinated or variolated with smallpox. Gives your immune system a time to respond and react And by the time it gets to your lungs, it won't be lethal. Lots of similarities. And why? It's because it's a viral disease. It's the same kind of disease. And all the reactions, all the negative reactions to vaccination, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, but all the anti-vaccination, that went on in the 18th century as well. Dr. Boylston had a firebomb thrown into his house. It was up, it was God's vengeance. Well, that again echoes today. And that's because the viral behavior hasn't changed in 200 years, but neither has human nature. You know, unknown is always scary, always misinformation, and always problematic. So, any questions about 18th century medicine? About COVID? About smallpox?
Do you
Bleeding?
have statistics of how many percentage of prisoners died at Camden jail of smallpox?
I don't know, but it was when Andrew Jackson was imprisoned there, his brother, both of them got it. His brother died of it, which did not endear him to the British at all. But, you know, anytime you put soldiers in crowded camps or conditions where they're not doing their best and they get infectious disease, it'll spread like wildfire and it'll fell a lot of people.
How many people got smallpox in the 18th century?
If you had, in Boston, there were about 13,000 people in town. 1,000 people fled. And when you look at those numbers, over 800 people died. Now, Dr. Boylston had about 239 patients that he inoculated, because once somebody told, you know, oh, guess what I had done at Dr. Boylston's, people came flocking to get this done. He only had 2 deaths. He had a 3rd death, but it was probably, they already had smallpox by the time he got inoculated, and it doesn't work quite as well. So it was a dramatic difference, even though it was different numbers, but a dramatic number, and it went from 20 to 40%, and it depends on the kind of smallpox you get. It's the same smallpox, just different manifestations. If you got discrete smallpox scarring going on, you had a better chance of surviving. If you got a hemorrhagic variety, where it was a confluence of smallpox, your mortality was 100%. And you'd bleed under the skin, or it was just you just engulfed by smallpox. So again, looked at it as different diseases. It's not different diseases, it's just different manifestations of the same disorder. Any other questions? Yes.